Hello and welcome to today's video where we're going to go over a kind of return on investment sort of deal here. Damage share versus gold share. How do these teams utilize, how do these players utilize the gold they receive? Okay, so to try and explain this, if hopefully you haven't clicked off yet, is so the first two videos we did a gold share video. How do teams allocate gold in terms of share? The 100% of the pie in a game, how is it dispersed between the 5 roles? And then we did damage a few days ago. Who is dealing the damage on these teams? Now, in the third iteration of this, we are looking at how do those players utilize that gold in terms of damage, if that makes sense. What's the correlation here? Like so let's, for example, here we have -2 in top to 6. That would mean that in the case of Dignitas, 5.6. So that's Rich, in the case of Rich, he deals 5.6% more damage than he receives in terms of gold as far as the pie is concerned. So roughly, I would say 25.6, well, 26.7 is probably around where it is versus 21.1%, something around there. So in that case, Rich is utilizing that gold to the nth degree. He is finding a way to make things happen with it. He's dealing damage with it. And that's only one part of it, though, because some players aren't going to deal a lot of damage. Maybe their role is more of a facilitator or weak side or a tank, and that's why this is not perfect, but it's a nice thing to look at to be like, oh, these players are really using the gold that they're given relative to the team that they're on. And then at this end, it's the opposite. These players are actually utilizing that gold less than in terms of damage than what they're receiving. So in the case of Rascal in top lane, well, Frog does mess with those stats for a couple games, but I think it's like 90% Rascal. 1.7%, a negative 1.7%. So that means the DRX top laning duo averages about negative 1.7% damage relative to the gold they receive in terms of share. Now, other players towards the bottom there are players that we saw in the damage and gold video as well. Oscarinin, YSKM, Hoya, 3 players that, I mean, in the case of Oscarinin and YSKM, you would be surprised that they're at that end. But at the same time, somebody is dealing damage on these teams. And instead, utilizing their gold that much more. And then you have like a really good player in the case of Bin, right? So Bin actually is negative in terms of how he utilizes gold. His share is less than the gold he's receiving. But at the same time, I'm sure the DPM is higher than the gold per minute because BLG are so dominant, and it's just a matter of the fact that he is on a really good team. Now, that doesn't mean that BLG are not allocating their gold properly, though, at least from a damage standpoint, because Bin is not using all that share necessarily. And somebody on the team could use more gold and maybe even deal more damage. JDG, so Sheer Flandre, also at that end. A very good team, of course. Cloud9, in the case of LCS, of course, one of the better teams. Isn't going to MSI, but is one of the better teams. What else do we have here? Then we have like AL, EDG, Ultra Prime, KC, 100 Thieves. I mean, those guys aren't all great. Teams. Going back to this end again, Mirwin, Otawamne, we saw those 2 players in the last video dealing a lot of damage in top lane, and that's a lot more than the gold they're actually taking in terms of share. Rogue, Vitality. It's kind of funny that the first 5 teams on this board are Western teams. 4 of the 5 are from the LEC. LEC top laners dealing a lot more damage than in the gold they're receiving in terms of share. Weibo are the first Eastern team, followed by LGD and HLE. So ZDZ, Birdall, and Doran. Then 369. In the jungle, everybody is negative. So jungle role, not necessarily heavy damage. We do see games where players will be crazy and maybe play Kindred game and deal 30% of their team's damage, and they only received like 20% of the gold. But over the aggregate, it ranges from, at best, negative 1.3% in the case of Bo, to negative 7.1 in the place of in the case of D plus Kia and Lucid. And that's not a big shock because Lucid did not deal a lot of damage, like 10% of the team's damage, and he's receiving about 17% of the gold. Most junglers are in that 17 to 19 range. I'm sure if we look back at that video, the majority are sitting in that spot. Keep in mind, when you do look back at that video, I have updated these numbers in as far as today's games are concerned, where those videos were at the time. So there might be little changes, but at the same time, relatively the same. 5-6 games aren't going to make D plus. I mean, Lucid was so far by himself, there's no way he was going to get anywhere close to even the average. Some teams towards the top, though. So KC, EDG. Two teams we saw towards the top. Kanavi is dealing quite a bit of damage relative to his gold, and that's no surprise. Kanavi's carry-oriented. Lan, Beshwan, Blabber, Razork, Krako. And Krako was on my LPLL Pro teams. People didn't like it, but the fact is he utilizes his gold well. And the other junglers, Razork's dominant domestically. Blabber, dominant domestically. Lan, obviously has looked very good since he joined IG, and Beshwan has always been that guy that leaves a little bit to be desired. Milky Way. So Milky Way drops off here a little bit. We saw him, I think, second or third. Well, yeah, FPX, so Milky Way pretty much. Second or third in terms of damage share, but in terms of how he uses gold, he is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 9th on here, 8th or 9th. And that's because he's getting more gold than necessarily these other players on here, as well as the fact that FPX have played games since then. Sheo, very good at utilizing his gold. Willer is a player that surprised a lot of people, and I had him on my LCK first team. Statistically is super good, and people kind of look at Willer from his HLE days and just completely forget about the fact that he was like 17 years old and at Worlds, and that was a shock for him, and he hasn't really had an opportunity to succeed since, and I think that he's super good. In terms of the Lucid end of this, so XU also there, another rookie jungler. Peanut and Owner, so negative 6.3%. So facilitator oriented. We do not think of Peanut and Owner as carries, and that's because they're not. They're going to soak up damage. Shun. I was honestly surprised to see Shun over here because he's a carry-oriented jungler, at least statistically. But he's not using that gold as much as you would like relative to the rest of his team. Kuz, Isma, Tien down at that end as well. In mid lane, it ranges, everybody's positive. So everybody is coming away with a higher share of damage than gold. And the highest is about 9.3% in the case of Fofo. So he's dealing 9.3% higher damage share than gold share. And the lowest is Vitality Hybrid of 0 and Perks at only 0.7%. So not very, they're very facilitator oriented at best, if not simply not carries at all. So at this end, because it's more spread out, it's actually one of the more spread out groups we have. And by the way, I should have said this right away, in the extra content tab on the Discord, you can see the rankings of these and the numbers, so you can follow along and look at them. So like I said, Fofo is at this end. We have Rookie in second with Nip, followed by Fnatic, KDF, and Immortals. So Humanoid, dominant in the LEC, deals a ton of damage. When I see him, I do see carry-oriented mid laner. Honestly, one of the few Western mid laners that when they go to an international event, I don't think that they're going to get gapped. If anything, Humanoid's actually done very well internationally in lane. Bulldog is the carry for KDF, and we see that because, hell, the lowest bot lane spread is due to him. Is Bull, and Bull was at only 1% higher damage share than gold share, while Bull, Taeyun hybrid. Other top, we have Mask, Now, this is something to note too. Mask was clearly the highest in damage share, but now that we actually look at it and we look at how much gold he was getting, he is, fifth or sixth in terms of the difference. So that just shows, he's getting a lot of gold, and that's why he's dealing a lot of damage. Yukai, Niski, Shanks, and EDGs. They only use two different mids, right? Fisher and 0909. And in the case of Nuke, all towards the better end of this. Now towards the more tanky facilitator, not carry-oriented mid angle, we have Vitality's duo. Insanity, Shopify Rebellion, Frascali for Mad Lions Koi, Dove for Dignitas, in part probably due to this up here. We also have to keep in mind they're not dealing a lot of damage either. Jensen, Palafox, Hai Chow. So not dominant teams. I guess Jensen, you could say, they're going to MSI, so a good team. But otherwise, the first elite mid laner we have is Yagao at 3.1% in positive, in the positive end of things. Bot lane, it ranges from 1% in the case of KDF all the way to 9.1% in the case of NRG. So FBI dealing a lot more damage than the gold he's receiving. A ton more. The next highest is 8.5 with Teddy, and we saw Teddy go off this board in damage. And then the third highest is Nongshim at 7%. So Jiwoo is third in terms of utilizing the gold he receives, and FBI and Teddy are on their own spectrum here. But then you have Elk. So that's why BLG are the way they are. That's why we see that the shares, especially in the jungle, not necessarily reflect the amount of gold they're getting, because Elk is just dealing so much damage. We know his DPM divided by gold per minute is one of the best in the world. I think he had 823 DPM this past year thus far. Then we have other elite bot laners in the case of Viper and Gala right after that. Of course, you do have some imposters with B-Voy and 1XN in there, but they're dealing a lot of damage relative to the gold they're receiving, and they do deserve credit for doing that. OMG, Breon also up there. Towards the bottom, like I said, KDF, but then we have Weibo with Light. He's not dealing a lot of damage relative to the gold share. Comp struggling, Upset, no surprise there. Team Wheeze duo, also not elite. Flacket is not a carry-oriented 80 carry in my opinion. Doggo leaves a lot to be desired on Ultra Prime. EDG, a disaster. Duck Dom, then Exakick and Noah. So all these guys really, honestly, this past year, Light should be doing better. I expect more out of Light and Exakick, but everybody else here, that is the type of 80 carry they are. They aren't going to deal a lot of damage. I do not think of damage and hard carrying when I think of those guys. So, honestly, there's not a lot of surprises in my opinion there. At support, everybody is negative from negative 7.1% all the way to the best at negative 2%. Of course, supports aren't going to deal a lot of damage. T1, FPX, FlyQuest all the way over here, dealing nearly as much damage as they receive in gold, and that's not a big shock because that was reflected in the damage share video. Followed by Ondel, and then Team Heretics duo of Kaiser Trimby. Zazel, Hillisung. The next highest, Missing and Mickey, are at about negative 4.7%. Now, the guys that are definitely more Enchanter, Engage, tanky supports that aren't going to deal a lot of damage. These guys were not playing Rumble support, for example. HLE and EDG in the case of Delight, and then Vampire for the most part. Negative 7.1%. So the damage that they're dealing is negative 7 relative to the gold they receive. That's spent elsewhere. Other people dealing more damage. Hell, we have HLE here. And HLE high in that case. For EDG, it's no surprise we have jungle way over here. And mid lane here. Nongshim way over here. Like the guys towards that end, it's being offset. And it's not a shock when you really watch those teams play that it is. Peter is not a guy that I see as a carry-oriented support. That's a guy that's going to play games where he is going to deal more damage than you would expect out of a support, right? More of a kill lane type support. Joao, Cal, also more of a setup support, if you will. Huhi. We got LNG's duo, OMG. PP got him. Surprised he's that low, but then again, he wasn't really as aggressive as history would indicate. Another couple good ones. We have On right here alongside Barrel at about -5%. So, I mean, support, we know the different types of supports, right? We see Carrier play. We saw Life play, Buzio. They play champions where they're going to be dealing a lot of damage. They're very aggressive supports, where those guys are more of the sit back, keep my AD carry alive supports. Nevertheless, though, if you like this video, like it, subscribe to the channel for daily League of Legends content. Follow me on Twitter, join the Discord, become a YouTube supporter, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.